Hi guys, so today we are going to discuss about another question which can be seen on the CKAD exam. So here we are going to discuss about the persistent volume and the persistent volume claim. So let's go through the question first, and then let's view the documentation and grab the essential parts we need to discuss and write a solution for this kind of a question. So first, create a persistent volume named logs-pv that maps to hostPath var/logs. This access mode should be ReadWriteOnce and ReadOnlyMany. Provision a storage capacity of 5 GB. Ensure the status of the persistent volume shows available. Then we need to create a persistent volume claim named logs-pv. It shows read-write-once access. Request a capacity of 2 GB. Ensure that the status of persistent volume shows bound. Then mount the persistent volume claim in a pod running the image nginx at the mount path var log nginx. Then open an interactive shell to the container and create a new file named my-nginx.log, and the file should be placed on this path. Exit out the pod and then delete the pod after you create the file, and when you redeploy the pod using the same YAML, the file should exist at the path. So that's the question we are going to discuss today. Let's go to the documentation and see whether we are having the necessary knowledge to handle this type of a question. So this is the documentation. In this one, I'm going to search volume, and I will go to the first search result, and here there is a subtopic called persistent volumes. So here's the persistent volume introduction, and then these some important stuff here. So I would like to point out that the persistent volume can be provisioned in two ways. One is static and the other one is dynamic. So the only change is that static ones would be created by a Kubernetes administrator. So they will create multiple persistent volumes matching to the hardware configuration, and as CKAD Kubernetes developers, we can use persistent volume claims to bind to those static volumes. If you choose the dynamic path, then it has to keep the storage class empty. Otherwise, if you define a storage class value, then it would choose the dynamic allocation path. So then I would like to talk about binding. So when a persistent volume is created, there will be multiple configurations like storage and access permissions and so on. So when a matching persistent volume claim comes, then that specific persistent volume and persistent volume claim will be binded. But the important thing to note here is that there will be a one-to-one mapping. So multiple persistent volume claims cannot be binded with the single persistent volume. So that's an important point to note of. Then the reclaiming section. So we can define what should happen the underlying data when we delete the persistent volume. So either we can keep it as retain or delete. There was another option called recycle, but it is deprecated now. The retain reclaim policy will keep the data when you delete the persistent volume. Then the Kubernetes administrator will have to clear the data manually by visiting the worker node. So that's the basic thing behind the retain reclaim policy. And delete reclaim policy will delete the underlying data when we delete the persistent volume. So that's the summary we can get from the persistent volume and the persistent volume claims. Then let's copy a persistent volume definition and adjust it to our requirement. Okay, this one should work because this one is coming under the persistent volumes. Then I'm copying this one. So first thing is we have to rename the persistent volume to the one the question states. So then after that we can keep the storage as 5 gigabytes because the question also requires the amount of 5 gigabytes, and the volume mode default is set to file system, so this line is not mandatory. So I like to keep my definition file simple as possible, so I'm removing this line. We have to add another access mode because in the question there was another access mode called read-only-many. I'm adding that one. So then we can define the persistent volume reclaim policy. Here it is set to recycle, but I would like to keep that one as delete. So whenever we delete the persistent volume, the underlying data is also get deleted. Then the storage class name, we don't need to define this value, and the mount options are also not required for the hostPath type. So here the persistent volume is a NFS type, but when you go through the types of persistent volume, there is the NFS which is available in the example, but we are focusing on the hostPath. So we can change the NFS type to hostPath, and then we have to define the path. The path should be this one. So what this states is, whenever we create the persistent volume, our worker node will have a path like this one, and then the persistent volume will also allocate some space in this directory. Since we don't use NFS, this line is also redundant, so we are removing that line as well. So this is the persistent volume definition. Then we will write a persistent volume claim next. So here is the example of persistent volume claim. Here the name should be logs-pvc, and the access mode required is read-write-once access. So it's already defined here. The volume mode, as I mentioned in the persistent volume definition, this line is also redundant in the persistent volume claim definition as well. So the required resource amount is 2 gigabytes. I will change this 8 to 2, and the storage class name, since if we are define a value here, then the persistent volume will be defined dynamically, but since we are more focusing on the statically created persistent volume binding, we will keep this as empty string. And then selectors, we don't need those things because we are already creating a persistent volume matching to this claim. So then we will write a pod definition to use this persistent volume claim. I will use this one. So I would like to rename my pod as my-nginx, and then the image should be also my-nginx. It's since we changed the name, we can change the container name as well. So the image is already my-nginx, and here the volume name is mypd. I can give a different name if you want. So I will give logs volume, and the same name should be appear in this line as well. So the persistent volume claim name should be different. So we gave the name as logs-pvc. I will paste that value in here as well. Finally, the mount path should be this one. I will change this value as well. So that's all we need to do in the provision in writing the definitions. Okay, now we are going to create the persistent volume first. To do that one, we will type kubectl get -f pv.yaml. Okay, now the persistent volume is created. Let's see whether we have that persistent volume in available state. Okay, here the logs-pv showing available. So we can move on to creating the persistent volume claim. To do that one, then I will see whether the persistent volume claim is showing bound, because the persistent volume was already there. If I see the persistent volume status also, then its status is also showing as bound. Then finally we are going to create the pod. So the pod is also created. We will see the pod status. It's showing as running. Then we are going to connect to that pod. To do that one, type kubectl exec -it interactive mode. The pod name is nginx --bin bash. Then we will change the directory to var log nginx So here we are having only 2 files. We will create a new file called my-nginx.log in this directory. We are creating a new one as then we will see the content of it. So it's there. Then we can exit from the pod and then we can delete the pod by typing kubectl delete pod in nginx. So the pod got deleted. Then to verify, I will type. So there are no pods in the default namespace. So we will create the same pod once again. Here it got created. Then we will connect to that one by using this command, and then we can see whether the file does exist by changing the directory into the mount path, and here the file is existing on the newly created pod as well. So the content is also should be there. Yes, the content is also there. So this is the persistent volume and the persistent volume claim definition working in the Kubernetes domain. So this type of persistent volume would be useful for the database storage or for the log storage and so on. That's the end of my video. So we will see you next time.